Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, host of the Vision for Life podcast. The basis for everything we discuss here is God's revelation of himself to us. God's revelation surrounds us. God's revelation of himself brings wisdom and clarity to those who lack the ability to see. It provides us with a unique spiritual light that allows us to see things we couldn't previously, unaided by God's word and by God's spirit. And Hunter is joining me again today. Welcome, Hunter.
Autumn, it's great to be back with you.
We're going to continue our conversation about daily life with God.
I'm excited to do this.
So where are we picking up? Can you give us a recap from last week? For our listeners, we began this series of conversations last week, and we're going to continue it today. You can go back and listen to that full episode, or we'll give you sort of the bullet point version right now.
Yes. The whole inspiration for this comes from the notion that God created us for relationship to him and reconciled us back into a relationship with him. And so the whole point of the gospel is to lead us into fellowship and into communion with God. And I just think, and I've experienced myself and am talking to many Christians, their experience, their day in, day out experience of their faith is, I have to believe certain things about God and about Jesus and about the world. And sometimes it's even tough. Like, I don't even know if I believe those things or if I like those things or I want to believe those things or what if I have intellectual problems with those things. So it's things I have to believe, and then it's things I have to do and things I can't do. So Christian faith for many people gets experienced as processing my beliefs, trying to do the things I'm supposed to do and not do the things I'm not supposed to do, and probably going to church and doing what the church tells me I'm supposed to do. What is missing for many professing Christians is actually fellowship with God and an increasing, steadily, gradually growing relationship with God. And I actually think when we don't experience God as personally present with us, that's creates a whole host of other problems that we often have. And maybe it will manifest as, I'm not sure I believe this, but the truth underneath that is I'm not even experiencing God as personally present. So the big idea of this series is we actually can experience God as personally present if we'll seek him and create some space and time for that. And we should seek him in faith that because of what Jesus has done for us, because he's justified us, because he's reconciled us to God, because we have the Holy Spirit within us, because these things are true, we should expect that God is going to meet us when we seek him every day.
I have a question before we jump into today's content. What is the precedent for this practice that we're talking about? The Bible does clearly use relational terms for us in relationship to God, in relationship to Jesus. It says that we are fellow heirs. It says that we are brothers and sisters. There are numerous ways that the Bible invokes familial, relational language when it talks about us in relationship to God the Father and God the Son. But as far as this actual practice of setting aside time or using a sort of format or routine in order to build relationship with God, to connect with God and listen to God, that's what we're talking about and saying people should do. Is there actual biblical precedent for that sort of practice, or is that just practical wisdom?
I'm so glad you asked that. And last week I taught our listeners a format, a flow of spending time with God that a man taught me 25 years ago, and I've been using ever since. And you will not find that format anywhere in the Bible. So nowhere do you even find the apostles who were trained by Jesus saying things like, now be sure you set aside some time in the morning and you think about what happened yesterday and you read a little bit of God's word and you pray. It's good that you have that time set aside. You actually don't see that anywhere. So in that sense, yeah, it's not commanded of us in Scripture. It is more practical wisdom. But like a lot of things that we do, I even teach people church is kind of this way. The way we do church is this way. Not that we are a church, but that we do church in a particular way. We have a Sunday morning worship service that lasts an hour and 15 minutes, for example. The way we do church is not prescribed. in the Bible. The length of a worship service is not prescribed in the Bible, but it is a format of doing what is modeled or commanded of us in Scripture. So I think there's biblical precedent for what we're talking about. One of the places that comes to mind is the watching and observing the life of Jesus. And one of the things the disciples noted about Jesus was his relationship with the Father. They even asked him, Lord, teach us to pray. And in the Gospel of Luke, the version of the Lord's Prayer we get in the Gospel of Luke is a response to that question. Lord, would you teach us to pray? And you can see what was happening. They were watching him every day, and he prayed, and they thought, we've grown up in Judaism, or we've grown up going to church, and we don't know how to relate to God like that. Maybe Jesus can teach us. So I think that's one example. A second example that has always fascinated me comes in chapter 1 of the Gospel of Mark. Mark is kind of the paperback, grocery store paperback gospel. It's the short to the point, written at a sixth grade reading level gospel. And
I love the Gospel of Mark.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite. It's the easiest to understand, and it's the least complex. And he doesn't give you any of the backstory of Jesus' birth or any of that stuff that Luke gives you. There's no angels appearing. There's just Jesus just starts his ministry in Mark chapter 1. He just focuses on his public ministry, and in Mark chapter 1, he makes it obvious that when Jesus started his public ministry, things got pretty big pretty fast. Jesus kind of went big time. Jesus went viral really, really fast. And
a lot of notoriety and fame really quickly.
Notoriety and fame. That's what happens when you're a powerful preacher and you can heal people. And he says in Mark 1:32, that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. So where this town was, like, they were all coming to hear Jesus. He healed many who were sick with various diseases, cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. And then the very next verse, he says this, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, so we're probably talking 3, 4 a.m., he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. So the picture is busy Jesus gets up early in the morning before anyone can find him and goes and spends time with his Father. Verse 36 then says, and Simon, that's Peter, and those who were with him searched for him. So the disciples had to go and find him. Like, where'd he go? And they found him, and they said to him, everyone is looking for you. And he said to them, let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out. And I read that, and I'm like, how did Jesus know that it was time to go to the next town? Like, it seems like he had plenty still to do in this town he was in. Everybody in this town was looking for him. He's in demand. And it must have been because he was spending time with his Father, and he got direction for that day from his Father in heaven. So I think we see that modeled for us in the life of Jesus. And so I'm not surprised that throughout Christian history, there have been these habits developing of getting up and spending time with the Lord. I think it comes from watching that in the life of Jesus and then how he taught his disciples to pray.
So there's biblical precedent in that sense. Jesus' life provides an example for us of how this looked. And then the content of spending time with God, prayer, spending time in the Word, those things are taught to us, perhaps not in the format that we're discussing on these episodes, but those components of life with God are taught to us in the life of Jesus and in the epistles.
Exactly.
Well, today we're going to discuss some barriers that we very quickly, very easily can run into when we begin to attempt to practice this building a relationship with God, time to spend with God, to get to know God, to hear God and speak with him. When we begin to attempt to set aside time, as we're going to advocate we should do, we very quickly run into things that try to steal that time or our attention.
It's so easy to get thrown off, and it's so easy to quit and to give up or to go long seasons where we're not spending time with God or cultivating that relationship. So the spirit of today's conversation is just to help us get back on the horse when we get knocked off, and to not quit and to not give up.
Okay, so the first obstacle that we're going to discuss is what we have labeled idealism.
We hear stories often of, like the one I just told you about Jesus. He got up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and went and spent time with his Father. And we can quickly get a notion of what a perfect relationship with God or a perfect rhythm of spending time with God could look like. And sometimes this comes from the great saints of Christian history. There's a story that often gets circulated about John Wesley, that John Wesley got up and prayed 2 hours before he began every day. And that's why he was so powerful. And so it can really be easy to hear those and go, gosh, that's what I've got to do. And if I can't do that, I can't have time with God. So
it just seems totally out of reach.
It
like,
seems
well, I
it
can't
seems
do
totally
that.
it seems totally out of reach. And then some of the idealism comes from our own expectations of what's going to happen. Sometimes we expect this is going to be awesome every time. So it would just be like if you expected every day in the life of your marriage to be just like when you were dating and were in just the thralls of enchantment with Jason. So these kind of idealism doesn't serve us well because it's not sustainable. So I think the things to just make sure we're expecting are, number one, we're not going to have a mountaintop experience every time, and every time we spend with God, every quiet time or every devotional time is not going to be equally fulfilling. And we're not going to execute perfectly, and we'll talk more about that in the points to come, I'm sure, but we're not going to do it perfectly. I had a very imperfect quiet time this morning before coming on this podcast to talk about quiet time. I was squeezed just a little bit on time, and then in my format of yesterday, word, and prayer, I got mostly through yesterday. And I was actually processing kind of some hard feelings from yesterday, some disappointment I had. And I just ended up spending 30 minutes processing that with the Lord. And I never got around to reading the book of Daniel, which is what I'm supposed to be doing in my word section. So every morning is not going to be, or every afternoon or every time is not going to be equally satisfying.
So that's one expectation that we may carry headed into this time, either that it has to be this incredible experience, or that we will execute it perfectly. Neither of those are really expectations that will pan out beyond
right.
maybe 1 or 2 days.
1 or 2 days. You will have some awesome times that are so meaningful, and God is speaking so clearly. And sometimes it'll be like, man, I processed some things from yesterday, and I read something in His Word that spoke to it, and I spent some time praying about it. And those are sweet and precious, and they do come, but they're not every day.
This exists in so many spaces in our life, just the practice of setting appropriate expectations. I think of a conversation with a friend a couple of weeks ago who has young kids and is attempting for the first time what we call a family trip, which is different than vacation.
Different than vacation, yeah.
But in a family trip, there will be moments that are delightful and precious, and what we equate with this sort of mountaintop experience, something you want to hang on to and cherish and remember. And there will be moments that are hard that you just have to get through. And the key is knowing that up front, setting your expectations appropriately, knowing that there will be both hard things and really precious good things. Oh. And so I think we practice that sort of realization of expectations in many areas
That's
of
right.
life.
It's a great analogy.
All right. Are there other idealistic expectations we may hold going into this practice that we could run into that would derail us?
Well, I think we've covered it, but let's now go to kind of the positive side of this. Here's what we should expect. What we should expect is gradual, consistent, increasingly satisfying relationship with God over a long period of time. So that's what we should expect. And we are not conditioned in our world to to really appreciate gradual growth, although gradual growth is usually the best kind of growth and the lasting kind of growth. But I would I'd almost go to the point of promising our listeners that if they stuck with this through the frustrations that we're going to talk about and kept getting back on the horse over the course of a year, they would have a more satisfying relationship with God at the end of that year than they had at the beginning, and it would probably sneak up on them. So what we can expect is just a gradually and increasingly satisfying relationship with our Father.
So as I listen to you describe that, Hunter, that is very visionary, that over time, with practice and commitment, we can expect growth and fruit that will result in our lives from this relationship with God. But what you're describing still requires discipline. And so I do like thinking, as I'm hearing you describe this, of the words commitment, discipline. Those are still required in order to experience then the growth that you're talking about.
And athletes really get this. They often fail or they don't succeed, and it's just keeping on that really is how they win. My current celebrity crush is a professional cross country mountain bike racer, Kate Courtney, and Kate Courtney often just crashes and flames out in her races, and yet she's one of the top in the world, and she's going to the Olympics this summer to race mountain bikes. And I'm so impressed with her resilience to just get back and ride again, even when she has a bad race, and how she processes that. And there's a lot of parallels, I think, to developing this habit of spending time with God. Another common barrier is just having a consistent time, and I mean that as a set time every day that I'm going to spend with God. So last week I recommended you need to actually set a time and spend that time every day with God. And many people experience it's hard to get a consistent time. So the first thing I want to do is just push a little bit here and say setting that consistent time is probably going to require some adjustment, maybe even sacrifice from you. It may require that you sacrifice 30 minutes of sleep and get up 30 minutes or 45 minutes earlier every morning. I just know, for example, my time is 7 a.m. If I don't consistently get up at 6, because I have an elaborate showering and grooming routine.
Which is not what we're going to talk about.
No. But, it takes... I have a full head of hair that it takes a long time to wash and to style. So
Definitely.
I need to get up at 6 if I'm going to be sitting at my desk to start spending time with the Lord at 7. So that's a sacrifice sometimes. Sometimes I don't go to bed quite on time. So there's a sacrifice built in. So I do want to push there and go, this may not just fit neatly into your current life if it's not a habit. You may need to adjust some things. Having said that, I think we will all experience that whatever time we've set, there are interruptions to it. You mentioned people with small kids. That's the most disruptive thing in the world is small kids, right? But even if you don't have small kids, there will be disruptions. I have some things some meetings that get scheduled for 6 a.m. at times. Sometimes I'll meet guys for breakfast, and that's usually a 7 o'clock meeting. There are very few breakfast places in Denver that open before 7 a.m.
It's true.
Because we're kind of an underachieving city.
I think I've found them all.
That's right. But sometimes I'll meet guys for breakfast at 7 a.m., which is the time that I've set to meet with the Lord. So travel is a very disruptive thing for me. When I'm out of my normal place of living and out of my normal rhythms, it's hard to get up at 6 and spend time at 7. So these are just some of the things that disrupt my rhythms. I'm sure we'll all experience that.
Do you have any suggestions, practical suggestions for someone whose schedule may just be erratic? So one really, I think, relatable barrier, if you will. I don't know that I want to use that term, but one interruption, that's a better word, is definitely if you have small children. There's just often an unpredictability to when a baby will wake up or go to sleep, or just things within your daily schedule that you can't count on. So that is one. I think another is probably an inconsistent work schedule or working odd hours. Do you have any practical suggestions for people who might face those interruptions or difficulties in finding a time?
Well, one thing that's been helpful to me, and I actually just learned this in the last few years, is to have what I call a flexible secondary habit. And this is not something that you would do necessarily every day, but it is a little habit that you can repeat over and over again, and you can kind of insert it into your day where you have some space. And I've, like I said, I've really just learned this in the last few years. But the flexible habit I have is I go walk and pray. So, for example, if this morning I didn't have a quiet time, I might find 20 minutes during my day. It could be right after lunch or before lunch or in between meetings. I would find a 20-minute buffer in my day, and I'll go walk around the neighborhood here behind the church, and I'll actually think through in my head my normal rhythm. So I'll think through yesterday and identify for the Lord what's pressing on me, or what were the high points of yesterday. And then I might just pull up on my phone and read a chapter of the Bible that it says I'm supposed to read. I'll just read on my phone while I'm walking around, and whatever time left I have left, I'll pray. And it's not nearly as long as my normal time would be. It's not journaled, so I don't have a record of it, and it's not written down on paper, but it's just a second habit that I can do to stay connected.
And that you can just assess your day and see where it will fit that day.
It fits everywhere. Sometimes I'll do it in the morning. Sometimes I'll do it in the afternoon. Sometimes I will do it at 9 o'clock at night. I'll say, I have not spent time with the Lord today. I have an hour before I need to start getting ready for bed. I'm just going to go walk around the neighborhood and pray.
Another practice that could be helpful for people if they find themselves in this sort of season, something I've done in the past, is to make a time to sort of calendar your week or your month. And typically what you're doing there, especially for those of you who do have strange work schedules or do have young children, things like grocery shopping. You'll figure out when during the week you're going to go grocery shopping, or when during the week maybe you're going to go to a workout class or meet up with a friend. And so you actually put those things on your calendar. And in doing that, you're assessing your time, what time you have to give to those things, where you have space available that might work with your child's schedule or their nap schedule or your work schedule. And so just do the same with your quiet time. It might change from week to week, but as you're looking at your calendar and figuring out where to meet up with a friend, figure out where you can slate in your quiet time. And again, you have to hold that loosely. I understand that you may run into interruptions with that time as well, but it's much more likely to happen if you give it a little bit of thought at the beginning of the week or the beginning of the month and actually assign time to it.
I know you. I bet you're a week planner, like you just described. So I'm assuming that didn't just come off the top of
We've
your head.
worked together for a long time, Hunter.
I love that. I love that idea. And to look at your week and just plan when you're going to spend some time with the Lord during the week. I do something similar. I plan what's most important for my week. So I plan the times during the week I'm going to work on sermons. I plan the times in the week I'm going to meet with members of our team who I need to meet with. I make sure those are on the calendar before I say yes to other things. And yeah, it would totally make sense that I should plan some time to be with the Lord.
And when you're doing that, you're saying, like you said, your priorities. So once you write it in there, it's something that you've given priority to and said, I'm going to set aside time for this. And that even helps your mindset shift into, like we talked about before, a sort of discipline, a commitment to this. You're giving it space. You're making it priority. And so you physically reinforce that by writing it in and planning on it.
I like that. Now, with this inconsistent time, let's also talk about how this often can throw us off our Bible reading plan.
Ooh, I have experienced this. Yes.
Yes. Has anyone ever fallen behind on a Bible reading plan? Everyone who's ever started a Bible reading plan has fallen behind on a Bible reading plan.
And that can totally derail you.
It can be so frustrating.
Yes.
And sometimes you get in a book that you just get bogged down in. I just got bogged down last year in Ezekiel. Ezekiel just went on and on and on. And I've read Ezekiel before, but for whatever reason, last year he just seemed really long-winded. I have learned to that if I have a 12-month Bible reading plan, it's probably going to take me 13 to 14 months to finish it. So usually by somewhere in the third month, I'm behind on my Bible reading plan, and I just keep chipping away at it. And my perspective is, hey, if I read through the Bible in 14 months, that's awesome. And it's not a big deal in the scheme of eternity that I lost those 2 months, and I think that's what I would recommend. Just stay on the horse, stay on the plan, keep going. And if you get bogged down somewhere, it's okay to skip to the next thing as well. So if you get in a long book, especially one of the longer Old Testament books, and you feel bogged down and you've given it a good shot and you just need to skip ahead, that's fine.
So if you can deviate from the Bible reading plan, it's okay.
I think it's more important that we read the Bible and process it with the Lord than it is that we finish or check off a plan.
Yeah, the point of us spending time with God is not a checkbox.
That's right. That's right. Now, that kind of leads into a third barrier that I think we should talk about, and that is many people will say this to me: the Bible confuses me, or there's a lot of stuff I read that I don't understand. And I just want to tell you, as a professional Bible reader who has trained in how to study the Bible and has to do it every week for my work, there are parts of the Bible that confuse me and that I read in my devotional time, and I'm like, I'm not sure what that means. I will always go, if I had time to pull a commentary off the shelf, I could probably figure out what that means, but I don't know what that means. And I just want to come back to what we discussed last week, which is there's a difference between Bible study and devotional reading. And in Bible study, we're really trying to ask, I want to make sure I know what everything here means. But in devotional reading, we're just gleaning for what the Lord would say to us. So we should expect we're going to encounter things we don't know what they mean, and maybe we're not going to get much out of them because we don't know what they mean. But it's okay just to keep going. And it's okay to keep going and just to get what you can for that day. This is one of the reasons I like to sprinkle Psalms and Proverbs into my daily reading, because even if I'm reading something hard, a hard book that I don't know quite what it means, like one of the Old Testament prophets, and I'm not sure all that's going on in the background, I can probably get something from the Psalm that day or from the proverb that day. So I just want to tell our listeners it's okay not to understand everything. I'll also put another plug in for study Bibles. Study Bibles give me just enough notes and just enough explanation that I can usually get some of my curiosity satisfied and keep going in my reading.
I think another great tip are the questions that you had encouraged people to ask. So to look for God in the text, even if you don't understand everything about it or you don't understand the historical context, but to look for God, look for where he's at work, what we're learning about him and his character, what we're learning about how he relates to us, to people.
And when you read the Bible through that lens, you can often see what God is like, even if you don't understand all the background of what's happening in this particular story. So that's a great reminder. Thanks for that.
Our last barrier that we're going to discuss today, we've called distractions, and these can come in so many forms.
Yes, and I'm thinking not so much of the distractions that come from outside of us, like the kids yelling or them paving the street in front of my house right outside my home office, which has been happening for the last 2 weeks. But I'm thinking more of the distractions that come from within. This is, I'm upset about something, or I had a hard conversation yesterday, or I'm having an argument with my spouse, or I got an email that was flustering and I'm thinking about it. Those kinds of distractions that make it hard to sit down and to pray and to read the Bible. And it's right here that I just want to bring us back to the whole reason we're doing this. The big idea is God actually wants to use the stuff of our daily life. This is why we call it daily life with God. He wants to use the stuff of our daily life to connect with us, to pastor us, and to disciple us. So often what we call a distraction, especially these kind that come from within, are an invitation from God to connect with him in and through that thing. I'm just so amazed at how many times in the Bible it's when people are encountering problems that God is meeting them and they're learning who He is. So that's why I told you this morning I was just spent my whole quiet time just kind of processing with the Lord something difficult that I was wrestling with, and it was kind of making me sad. And I just thought, this is not a distraction to reading the Bible. This is what God wants to meet me in today. Mm-hmm. So I would just encourage us to reframe those internal distractions as opportunities to experience God's presence.
Yeah, I think this is one way that I have experienced this gradual growth. Instead of seeing this time, the attempt to spend time with God, as a prescriptive sort of practice, seeing it more as invitational into His presence. And so I have actually one difference I have noticed in my own life with God and spending time with Him is regularly just talking with Him about those very things that you're pointing out, those internal distractions, something you're processing that's difficult, someone who's on your mind or your heart, or something you're confused about and don't know what to do with. I've started becoming far more comfortable at this point in my relationship with God with just talking to Him about those things.
I love it. And that's the daily stuff of your life that he's relating to you in the midst of.
Well, thanks, Hunter, for discussing this with me today.
Well, it's been great. And I want to put in a plug here that our listeners email us questions that they're having or things they would like to hear us discuss about this topic, because I love interacting with people on this. And I think I mentioned last week I hosted last year a learning community on this, and it was the questions people asked that was really where we learned. So I want to invite that from our listeners and hope we get some great questions or topics that you want to hear more about. And you can just email those to us. What's the address?
podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, and to our producer, Jesse Cowan.